Thank you for joining the course today on nature-based solutions, disaster and climate resilience for business. This is the second workshop that UNEP is hosting with IUCN, WBCSD, PETR, Oppla, and the We Value Nature campaign. Before we get started, I would just like to ask everyone to make sure their mics are muted. And please, during the course today, please feel free to take notes and also use the chat function to put your questions in so you can be an active listener and also so that we can respond to your questions during the different breaks after each speaker. Just a moment, please. I seem to be having a technical difficulty. So just to go over the objectives for the session today, as you can see, I think they're pretty clear, but we hope that you will learn why NbS is important for business and better understand how NbS can reduce business risk and build resilience. Also, everyone participating today is invited to take a short quiz at the end of the course, and this will allow you to receive a certificate for attending. In addition, you can receive another certificate for attending all 3 workshops. And last week, the first workshop looked at the business case for disaster and climate resilience. I hope many of you were with us then, and the difference between nature carbon solutions and NbS. And this session is still online for anyone who missed it, and you can still participate, take the course and the quiz if you go to the We Value Nature website, and hopefully that someone can put that link in the chat for everyone to have. Today's session will look at the IUCN Global Standard for NbS and how to measure performance and impact. But before we get started, we just wanted to get a sense of where everybody is on what they think the global standard is about. So we're going to do a quick Mentimeter question. And if you go to your device, a separate device, hopefully, or if you can go online and just put in www.menti.com and enter a code where it asks you 4147-8004, well, actually not dash, space 8004, you will be able to go to the question and answer it. And I'm going to turn it over to Katia now at WBCSD, and she's going to help you take the question.
Thanks, Leanne. So we already have some answers coming in actually. So let me share the Mentimeter. So the question is, have you already heard of the IUCN Global Standard for nature-based solutions? So here is really just to get a sense of the level of understanding in the room. Is this something completely new to you? Perhaps you've heard of it already. So helpful to kind of know where people are situated on this. But I see that 70% have already heard about it. Now, this may be linked to the fact that many of you guys are joining again after following the first workshop last week, where we did very briefly introduce the standard. So even for those of you that have heard about it already, today we'll be going much more in depth compared to the first workshop into what the nature-based solution standard is, why it's important, how it works, and we're going to also have some really great practical examples. And then for those of you that have never heard about it, then this is really the perfect workshop for you. You're going to be really coming out with the necessary understanding of the standard. Great, so please don't hesitate to continue responding to this question. And Leanne, I think I'll hand over back to you.
Okay, thank you. Can you see my screen yet? No.
Not yet.
Okay, 1 second, there we go. Okay, so thank you everybody for taking that question. Now, just to get started today, there we go. Just before we get started today and turning over to the experts, I just thought we would do a quick run through of the agenda. Basically, we're going to do a deep dive into the rationale and the content of in the IUCN Global Standard, along with a quick run through the criteria it has set for users to benchmark their NbS programs. Then we will hear from an early mover in the UK who is overseeing an NbS pilot project there with a utility company. Next, an IUCN expert on climate and oceans will share the recent results of one of her big NbS projects in Asia. And we will hear about the next steps underway to scale up the global standard for NbS before turning over to our colleagues at UNEP, who will give us a sneak preview of the final workshop. In between, as I said, I hope all of you participating today will ask questions via the chat so our experts can respond while we have them here with us. And since we have a pretty full agenda today, I guess we should get started. So Gerard, let me just first introduce you. It's my privilege to introduce Gerard Boss, the Director of the Global Business and Biodiversity Program at IUCN. And following him will be my talented colleague, Veronica Ruiz, who is a program officer with IUCN's Global Ecosystem Management Program and leading a lot of our NbS work. So Gerard, over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Leanne. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you. It's great to see so many participants on this second workshop. We've got 133 of you out there, and we know hopefully that this gets viewed and downloaded afterwards as well. So as some of you have participated to the first meeting, I did a small teaser on the global standard, the IUCN Global Standard for nature-based solutions. And the one thing that was actually missing was a picture of all different types and examples of nature-based solutions, because the global standard can sound a little bit conceptual and theoretical, but in the end, it is really the real practical application of a lot of practices that have been developed over many, many years and practiced by many people over many years. And if there's one phrase that I'd like you to remember from this training, is that nature-based solutions are addressing or providing solutions to societal challenges of today without creating the problems or the issues for tomorrow. Just keep that in mind, because that's one feature of current effect nature-based solutions. So we were on launching back in July 2020, is it? I'm lost in years now because time flies, and we took a risk of doing that. It was in the middle of the pandemic. People were in virtual meetings, but we have seen a huge uptake of it and a huge interest in it. And this is great. But to a certain extent, we also see the term nature-based solutions used by many. And that was also the reason why we felt that setting really the scene with the global standard and re-emphasizing the full definition of nature-based solutions was important. Let me go to the next slide, Leanne, please. So conservation was really a paradigm shift. Community had us very strongly on safeguarding nature, for its own sake. And really where nature-based solutions comes in, because the starting point is societal challenges, as you will hear from me, from Veronica, and hopefully all the various speakers. Clearly the element of safeguarding society and what are the solutions that can be provided by nature in a productive landscape became this additional feature with nature-based solutions. And it was making sure that conservation and restoration actions are embedded also in a productive landscape. So that leads us, next slide, to the actual definition of nature-based solutions. It's actions to protect and sustainably manage and restore natural and modified ecosystems, whilst addressing societal challenges, and we'll go down to what some of these societal challenges are, in an effective and adaptive manner, but simultaneously providing benefits not only to nature and biodiversity, but also really providing benefits to people. And it's that whole wide concept that we are trying and we will be discussing today in detail. And we did get questions in the past about, is EBA now different, ecosystem-based adaptation different from nature-based solutions? No, it's a sub-part of it. We also had last week some discussions about are nature climate solutions outside of nature-based solutions. No, not necessarily. We hope that a lot of the nature climate solutions can actually be fully integrated in nature-based solutions, where we know that the societal challenges that they are addressing in priority is climate. Next slide, please. So nature-based solutions is a way of addressing one or more of societal challenges. And Veronica will go later on in more details on this one, because this is actually our first criteria when we look at the standard. But what I want to make sure, and this is really addressing myself to the economic actors that are listening to this call, is here we're addressing societal challenges that have really a very strong economic value. So the idea is really to show and demonstrate that nature can benefit and can help alleviate some huge costs or values that are out there in the economy. And the descriptor report has also helped us articulating this a bit more clearly. Next step. So the standard is to help benchmark progress, because we want to actually be able to show comparability between one solution and another, to actually show the ones that are really applying all the criteria in the most effective way, and some that could be increased. We also want to create a common understanding and better playing field, so that if some are claiming that they are implementing good and effective nature-based solutions, well, that there is actually a reference point for that. The other element, and this is great because the avoiding of greenwashing is not only coming from the NGO side or civil society side, it's also coming from the business side. They want to make sure that when they are applying these solutions and saying that it is a nature-based solutions, they want to make sure that they are not then being accused of greenwashing, so that there is a scientific backing behind it and that they can be proud of what they are being implementing. And the last point, which is somewhat similar to the previous one, is to ensure that nature-based solutions are not mislabeled or misused. And the reason I'm saying that is because we are already seeing that the regulators are integrating more and more nature-based solutions potentially in the upcoming regulations, as they did for climate. So we want to ensure that if then there are claims for implementing and deploying at scale nature-based solutions, that we are really talking about solutions that do benefit people and nature. Next slide. But we know that nature-based solutions are complex. Every topic that deals with nature or biodiversity is complex. But hopefully with the standard, we're able to break in some silos and to really show you the holistic features of nature-based solutions, so that nature-based solutions can really be developed at scale. And one of the criteria is specifically addressing that, making sure that you are considering the policy alignment as well, so that actions can be sustained in time and not only being a one-off. And the last point is also making sure that there is new and enabling innovative operational mechanisms that help multiply these solutions. So I will be talking about that in the next steps, where we're trying to really create a user community so that actually experiences can be shared, and very good examples that you'll be hearing about today, for example, can be replicated and adapted in other landscapes and other areas. And hopefully that you come inspired out of this meeting and other meetings to implement your own or be a participant in another nature-based solution. Next slide. So as I said, scaling up nature-based solutions to secure its potential is, one of the main efforts and what IUCN really wants to do. And by setting the standard, it was not to limit it to a number of projects. It was really to make sure that if these solutions are nature-based solutions are being implemented, that they are being done in a cost-effective manner, that they are actually really providing multiple benefits. And that's where nature-based solutions sometimes are very different than some of the other types of solutions that have been provided, because we are convinced that nature-based solutions have a whole area of different benefits that they are actually providing, some well measured, some well monetized, some well valued. But we then will work with you to actually see on how can we make sure that all these benefits gets valued, monetized, and appreciated by the recipients, and actually provide even more argumentation for the financial sector to come in there. And then also we see really nature-based solutions as a fantastic opportunity for more cross-sector collaboration, and then hopefully to also providing some incentives for the policy features to change and really integrate nature at the heart of their making. Next slide. So the standard, and I'm repeating myself here a little bit, is to make sure that we still keep at the heart of any of the nature-based solutions the fact that we want to safeguard nature from overexploitation. Also, the whole stakeholder engagement element is a key. And Veronica, again, will talk about some of the criteria that really focus on this specifically. Build a common language and understanding. Increase demand. And the increased demand is interesting because we are already seeing the financial sector being more and more interested and wanting to actually be able to identify nature-based solutions in their portfolio, and even be able to identify the companies that are implementing nature-based solutions so they can reward them with investments and probably even potentially look at the cost of capital for that. And that is then what the last bullet is talking about as well, is this hopefully will incentivize a positive sustainable change and demonstrating that solutions where you're integrating the human ingenuity with the natural ingenuity is actually what comes to the front. And I know Dorothy will be showing some of your some examples on how marrying green and gray can actually do miracles out there. Next slide. So the actual global standard itself, and I know that I'm running a little bit lack of time, so let's go to the next slide straight away. So the global standard was a really facilitative standard. We didn't want it to be perspective, whoops, I can't find my word. And it was to help design, verify and scale up nature-based solutions. So we know that the standard can be used in different ways. Either it's retrofitting an existing project and see what are some of the weaker elements and the elements that can be increased. We actually did that with one of the private companies on an agroforestry project. Or it might be really at the beginning and the start of the project where you're rolling this out. There are 8 criteria and 28 indicators, and I said Veronica will jump into this. But really what I want you to understand is that this was really a co-creation between the conservation science, the social science, and traditional knowledge. And it is a little bit later that we integrated the business community in this as well. And one element that they actually did, which was very beneficial for us and is now fully embedded in our standard, is making sure that economic viability was clearly identified as a separate criteria. Now, clearly, there were 2 rounds of open consultations that we did throughout this process because we wanted to make sure that the standard as it's being developed and it was first proposed was really in accordance to the ICO Alliance Code of Good Practice. Because of course there is an effort and there is a willingness to see on how are we going to go and verify and assure these projects. So this is something I'll be talking about in the next steps, because yes, there is a willingness to actually see if nature-based solutions certifications as such, could actually be implemented as well, especially if we see that the finance sector and the regulatory sector are now saying that they want to be able to track and measure the impacts of some of these projects. Next slide. So this is the heart of the global standard. And I'll try to go through it very quickly because I know that Veronica will go through the points one by one afterwards. But the starting point is the societal challenge, the heart of these circles. And even if it's site specific, you need to take a larger scale system into consideration so that you look at how this develops further. That's why the design at scale is so important. However, when you are doing this, there is also a need to look at the 3 pillars of sustainable development. And it's unrealistic to think that you will always have a win-win-win or a triple bottom line straight up. Therefore, there is a need then to also look at the trade-offs and balancing, you know, the economic viability against the biodiversity net gain, against the inclusive governance. But in applying the standard, we want to make sure that you have looked at all three and not only at one of these three elements. And the balancing and the trade-offs is really important to do in an inclusive manner with the stakeholders, so that all the recipients of that solution are actually included in the discussion. The seventh criteria on adaptive management is making sure that the nature-based solutions is being implemented for the long term and will adapt actually to the changing circumstances, and especially when we have you know, the issue of climate change ongoing at the moment. And this is why we are looking in the economic viability and in criteria number 7 at the shorter as well as the longer term aspect. And the final criteria number 8, which is on mainstreaming and sustainability, is then really forcing the NbS implementers to really look at how does that work now for the rest of my operations? How does that feature into my corporate strategy or into the regulatory framework? Can now this solution be scaled up, duplicated, and adapted by others? So as you see, a very comprehensive set of criteria, but there are a lot of more detailed indicators behind it, and Veronica is going to go through them. Next slide. So here I'm just giving you a snapshot of the ability to actually you know, look at all these elements. And the one element that we are really trying to refine now more is how can we actually measure progress, and what are the metrics that we put in place to measure progress? Because we would like in the end to be able really to report on the overall impact that nature-based solutions are actually providing as an impact. Next slide. And this is where each individual solution will be rated from strong to insufficient. And I know it will be disappointing to be rated as insufficient, but the idea here is then to work with you and with the NbS experts that we hope to train over next courses and in the next month and years, so that they all help you to get more into the adequate or the stronger elements linked to the standard. Next slide. So the standard at the moment looks like a lot of guidance and written documentation. And as I will be talking later on, we hope that this will be much more practical examples and case studies. And this is why there is a call out to you to start implementing this and testing the actual standard. Because in the end, next slide, we want to be able to demonstrate all these projects that have many greens and what they have done to actually get from a red to a yellow and to potentially a green. But we know that from a corporate perspective, having a systematic measure of progress will be very appreciated by you. But here I'm handing over now really to Veronica, who is taking you to some of the criteria a bit more in detail, and then being able to answer some questions if they're coming up as well. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Gerard. Usually when going in detail to the criteria and indicators and the self-assessment, we may even take 3 days of a training, but today I will try to do my best with my strong Spanish accent for all of you. And thank you. If please participant, they can mute your mics. So as Gerard mentioned, IUCN is working in clarifying and especially ensuring that the right use of the concepts of nature-based solutions. You have been hearing so much about the concept. Can you please come back to the previous slide, please? So this will allow the right implementation and appropriation. However, while we need a clear definition, we need also help in being able to answer some question, like typical question like, what is a measure on how well we are covering all the necessary bases, or where do we need to improve? It's what Gerard mentioned, like even though you are flagged as insufficient, so what we need to improve, this will be the case. And also this is really particularly important given that the majority of nature-based solutions implemented will not come from our sector, the conservation sector or the natural resources sector. They may come from other sectors. So then we need to provide this common framework. Therefore, the global standard is designed as a facilitative tool, as Gerard mentioned, and is made by 3 different components. So in one side, we have the standard, which is all the narrative, the guidance, and the third element is the self-assessment tool, which will guide the user on what has been achieved and where to take actions or where are the gaps and the shortfalls. So as you see here in the slide, the self-assessment tool provides a summary of the level of adherence of the defined intervention with the criteria and indicators of the standard. You have a rating going from insufficient to strong. So you have all this scale of different colors. And why to use these self-assessment tools? Because the use of this tool will underpin the design of a solution, support the decision-making for example, investment or financing, and also to inform the scaling up of impact. And so briefly going now into the content of the standard, Gerard mentioned that the standard is made by 8 criteria. Next slide, please. But 8 criteria together with 28 indicators that all of them, they are interconnected, the one with the other. So criterion 1 is the basis of a solution. It is the well-defined problem, which is the societal challenge behind to be addressed. So the purpose of this criterion is to ensure that the NbS is designed as a response to a societal challenge or various challenges that has been identified as a priority. In the case of today's workshop session, we are talking about disaster risk reduction, but we know that disaster risk reduction may come together with another societal challenge to be addressed. So for example, climate change, food security or water security, or even environmental or land degradation. Criterion 2, next slide, is about the spatial scale. Spatial scale, and we need to consider what are the risks and the opportunity of the wider landscape, but also the seascape. Dorothy, she will talk about it. Now, why? Because they may have an immediate or eventual impact in our interventions. But the scale applies not only to the biophysical or the geographical perspective, but we also need to think about how other scales may be influenced. For example, we have the economic systems, we have policy framework, and also what are the importance of cultural perspective. So what this criterion 2 is very important because we really need to move from site-specific approach to have a broader approach. A broader approach also on the time scale. We have to move from projects that are really at shorter scale, like 1-2 years, to think about like more strategic way of implementing our intervention to make sure that we are making an impact. Then we have criteria 3, 4, and 5. The 3 of them correspond to the 3 pillars of sustainable development: environmentally sustainable, socially equitable, and economically viable. Criterion 3 is related to the NbS design and implementation. And really this must avoid undermining the integrity of the system and instead to proactively seek to enhance the functionality and connectivity of the ecosystem. Criterion 4, nature-based solutions for being sustainable must follow a strong consideration of the economic aspects. And also to think about what are the long-term gains and how those must be balanced against the short-term cost. When we move to criterion 5, we really need to think about like how nature-based solution has to acknowledge, involve, and respond to the concerns of a variety of stakeholders, especially the right holders. We cannot come with an intervention and not considering or integrating the different stakeholders that are involved in the decision. So we really need to come up with a transparent, empowering governance system where we can bring all the different stakeholders together. But however, I'm mentioning all of this, it is unrealistic to expect that triple bottom line, which win-win situation each time. This is in a perfect world. So therefore, criterion 6 is related to the decision making and the balancing of the trade-offs. So we really need to make choices, and sometimes the choices, they are not the best one. So we need to make choices for short and long-term gains to ensure that these processes are transparent, equitable, and inclusive. So this is directly linked to the previous criterion number 5. And criterion 7 respond to the need for an adaptive management, which facilitates continuous learning about system-wide processes and adapting our intervention according to the systemic changes. Today, talking about disaster risk reduction, we see that the climatic conditions, they are like changing constantly. We don't know what will happen. Well, we know because we have the scientists like studying about this, but we really need to think about like, when we are designing our intervention, we have to consider these potential changes, because a situation, we cannot think only about like the present situation. We really need to think about the future to be able to adapt to any potential risk and also to make assumption, especially with these changing conditions. Disaster will have a stronger severity and a higher frequency. So we really need to come up with a strong nature-based solutions. And finally, the true potential of nature-based solutions is realized through its long-term implementation at the scale, embedding nature-based solutions into policy or regulatory frameworks, as well as linking to national targets or international commitment. And this can be enabled by promoting criterion 8. For example, nature-based solutions can be a sort of a cornerstone tool to bring coherence and alignment between convention and frameworks. We know right now, for example, for the CBD convention, there are the negotiations ongoing. There is nature-based solutions are being discussed at the UNEP, so the Climate Change Convention. There is more and more recurrent to hear about nature-based solutions. And also we have the Sendai framework, which the new framework will start in 2030. We may think like, oh, 2030 is in 9 years, but we really need to start like thinking about like how this new framework should be developed. So nature-based solutions can be a way of linking all these different conventions, and also for countries and other decision makers to support them in using nature-based solution as a reporting mechanism to all these different frameworks. So here we have a robust yet practical framework as a common basis in truly leveraging the potential of nature-based solutions. And IUCN is looking forward to working with all of you together and in doing so. So thank you so much. And I hand over to you, Leanne.
Okay, thank you very much, Veronica and Gerard. We still have quite a few minutes for questions, at least 5 minutes for questions. So we've had a few come into the chat, which I hope one for each of you maybe we could to start with. Maybe first, Veronica, since you were just speaking, we can talk, I can ask you, somebody was interested to know about scoring for each criteria. And what is the reason or justification for the maximum scores, or maybe the insufficient scores as well? How is that done?
Yeah, sure. And Leanne, could you come back to the slide? So maybe for the participant, they can have again this table in front of their eyes. So the self-assessment tool is made by, let's say, different components itself. So we have a window for each of the criterion, and then we have the indicators follow with some guidance. So then the users, they can go through the guidance and the different questions, and they may, to help them to understand if they are achieving or not the different indicators. So within the self-assessment tool, we have some space for complementary information. One of them is the rationale behind of the indicators. Another is the justification and the means of verification. So obviously, depending on the type of intervention, they may be different type of means of verification. So this will help the users to understand which are the category of adherence that they are giving to the intervention. And it's really what Gerard mentioned, is like the fact of being insufficient, it doesn't mean that it is really bad. It is a really important way to say, like, where are the gaps and what should be enhanced? So this has to be as a positive way instead of like a negative, and then to think about like how we can enhance the intervention and keep working in implementing nature-based solutions.
Let me give a very tangible example that we had on one of our projects, which was on biodiversity net gain, for example. So we rated one of the projects insufficient in that area, and it wasn't because there was no positive impact on biodiversity, but there was no baseline that was set, which would actually allow to measure the progress. So then the project developer said, oh, no, but we have these reports and we can actually go back and actually measure the baseline, which will then be able to report on the progress. So that's really what we're trying to do with the standard as well, is, you know, hey, what are the things missing in the way of actually being able to demonstrate and measure the progress? That's really what the scoring is trying to do. And it's not to penalize people if they are not integrating or not putting you know, some of the elements in place.
Okay, thank you, Gerard. Just maybe one more question for Veronica, and then I have some other questions maybe that you could answer, Gerard. Veronica, somebody asked about criteria 6, and specifically on the risk, can anything like policy deficiency, ecological awareness within a specific geography be taken into consideration as well? So I'm sorry, I'm having trouble going back on the slides, or I would show it. But
It is perfectly fine. So criterion 6 is about trade-off and finding balanced trade-off. So this is linked to number 7 as well, and even to all of them, because all of these points, they have to be considered when designing an intervention. We need to think about like, what is the situation, sort of doing a situation analysis, and think like, what are the policy instruments and mechanisms that are there outside that will support the process of implementing the nature-based solution. So yes, policy is something that we tackle. And then ecological, what do you say? Ecological information, awareness. So this is, in any case, this is very important as well, because then it will depend on which type of trade-off you are considering. We have a really good example in Bangladesh, and this is about coastal communities that their main livelihood is fishing. And one of the problems was like the communities were overfishing at one point. So what happened? They decided, we really need to take a decision. And it was a decision that it was taken at the community level, because it was not any policy thing that was like really supporting them to take any decision. So the decision was taken to really stop fishing for a period. So there was an only specific period for fishing, which helped in those community, in those fish populations to increase their turnover, which means that then the communities, they have access to the livelihood, and it is having not only an impact at the ecological level, but economic level, because the community, they have their incomes, and also at the social level, because when we have issues at the economic level, they may have some social insecurities or social not conflict, as we say, but this is having all this impact. When we think about ecological, we need to think about what are the other aspects that we are touching upon.
Okay, thank you very much. And just quickly, a last question real quick for Gerard, and maybe also you can elaborate further when you wrap up later on, Gerard. But so one of the participants asked regarding the slide you started off with, showing all the different countries where NbS is underway. They asked, what is the criteria for this country selection, and are they based on a level of vulnerability?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm the best one to answer, because Veronica has been closer to working with these pilots, but I would say that you know, these first countries that were the first movers in this are the ones that came to us and actually said, we want to test this out, and we want. So it wasn't actually based on vulnerability necessarily, but clearly, you know, the ones that actually have a societal challenge to be addressed and actually think that nature can, you know, help the solutions, were the first one to move. I also saw some questions with regard to natural capital accounting, SASB, and other global reporting initiatives. I mean, one element that I'd like to highlight is that nature-based solutions, in my perspective, is the bottom-up approach to natural capital accounting. So it's really applying all the concepts that are integrated in a natural capital protocol, but from a solutions, from a needs basis. So it's actually a practical application or example on how the wider thinking of natural capital accounting can be applied, because once a nature-based solutions is well applied, you actually are probably replenishing the stocks, which is the first element of natural capital that we talk about. And happy to talk about the other reporting standards later on, because I think we really need to go on to the examples and some practical cases as well.
Yeah, agree. Okay, so to keep us on time, I think I agree. We should go now to the next presenter, and that's Lee Scofield, a senior site manager with RSP in the UK. And let me see, my slides are a bit frozen right now, so I'm worried. Will not go. I don't know if I can stop sharing, Lee. Is it possible for you maybe to share your screen, Lee? And I can stop sharing because my slides are frozen.
Yep, that should be fine.
Okay, I'll stop sharing now. Thank you. So over to you.
Okay, just give me a sec.
Apologies.
Good morning, everyone. It's saying I can't share.
Why don't you go ahead, Lee?
I'll try again, just a minute. Please.
No, I have it, Lee. Go ahead and present. You tell me next slide. I've got it.
Okay. Great. Okay, yeah. Morning, everyone. From the UK, I'm Lee Scofield, the Senior Site Manager at RSPB Haweswater. So my presentation is really just to help you visualize what nature-based solutions look like in a UK context. So we've been selected as one of the early movers for the global standards. We are representing, I suppose, the uplands. There are 5 projects, I think, in the UK: an upland one, a coastal one, an urban one. So yeah, we're the upland representative. So our work at Haweswater is all about management of an upland landscape and habitat restoration on the catchment of northwest England's largest reservoir, which is called Haweswater. We're in the Lake District National Park. So you can go to the next slide, please. So the interventions that we're making that are delivering the nature-based solutions are quite wide-ranging, and they include ecosystem restoration through reducing grazing pressure or modifying grazing, restoration of watercourses, restoration of hay meadows, peatlands, lots of tree and scrub planting. And by doing those interventions, we are aiming at working towards the following nature-based solutions. So disaster, allowing more natural hydrology in the catchments in order to reduce downstream flood risk, improving soil and vegetation structure to reduce runoff speed, which also complements to that. The interventions that we make are contributing towards climate change mitigation and adaptation, both through natural flood management measures, as well as the peatland restoration and tree planting. All of these are sequestering carbon. And then being on this important drinking water catchment, water security is a key focus for us as well. Through improved soil structure and changes to surface water flow, this helps water flowing to drop any sediment that it might be carrying so that it reaches the reservoir in a better state than it would do otherwise. So really using the catchment as a primary filter for water, also reducing erosion, and which also contributes to improving raw water quality. So the work that we're doing is, so we are adapting our work to kind of embrace the language of nature-based solutions. So the work that we've been doing at Haweswater has been running for around about 8 years. And the nature-based solutions sort of toolkit and language is quite new to us, but we're finding that the work that we've been doing fits with the ethos very, very well. So if I'm not using all of the correct terminology, please forgive me. I've been using a kind of terminology that is pretty close, but is not quite perfectly meshed at this stage. So the background to our work at Haweswater. So the site is managed under a management plan which is jointly agreed by our two organisations, but it's also a landlord-tenant relationship whereby we pay them a rent for the two farms that we're looking after. So there are 750 hectares of enclosed land, so that's land within a farm boundary, and associated with that land is a further 3,000 hectares or so of common land. So this is land that is owned by United Utilities, but over which our tenancies give us a grazing right. On some of those commons, there are multiple other common graziers as well. So delivering nature-based solutions requires engagement with those commoners and makes the work considerably more challenging than land which is just directly owned by one party. So we've got a major focus, as I said, on water quality, which is United Utilities' main driver, and wildlife, which is our main driver as the UK's largest nature conservation NGO. But those are not our pure focuses, and we're finding that by working towards those two objectives, we are delivering for a whole range of other ecosystem services as well, such as carbon and recreational benefits as well. Our aim is not simply to deliver nature conservation on our own site, but we want to use Haweswater as a place for advocacy, to try to find a better balance between hill farming, which is highly revered in the Lake District National Park, which is also designated as a World Heritage Site, and ecological restoration. So it's a real learning opportunity for our organisation to find where those opportunities are. Our farming operation is considerably more extensive than it was when we took over 8 years ago, and we have Cheviot and Swaledale sheep and belted Galloway cattle, and we use fell ponies. So we're trying to recreate a naturalistic grazing regime as we possibly can, while accepting that farming, particularly with the sheep, does compromise our delivery to a degree. The site is underpinned by 4 stewardship agreements, which provide the bulk of the funding for the work that we do on site and pay for salaries for me and my team and the land management operation. Okay, next slide, please. So we've just completed a series of visualizations in order to try to help people understand what the land management change we're pushing for will look and feel like. So in a national park, Lake District is the UK's most visited national park. Sort of 20 million visitors come annually. The landscape is cherished, and therefore there is understandable concern about what embracing a different approach to land management will mean for how the landscape looks. So these illustrations I'm just going to talk you through. This is the before picture. So this is what our land looked like when we took over our farm tenancies in 2012. So, you know, clearly a beautiful landscape, but with some major ecological issues. So the upland areas in particular had suffered from decades of heavy grazing, both by sheep and by unsustainable populations of deer, and they supported only a handful of species. Bracken, which is indicated by the orange, which is a fern species, was dominant, a dominant monoculture over large areas. Many of the bogs, the peatland areas, had been drained, funded through government grants back in the 50s and 60s, reducing their carbon capturing potential as well as their value to wildlife. And you can make out drains in the top left of the image there. And many, many peatlands across the UK uplands had been drained in a similar way. Many of our watercourses, including the Beck in Swindale, which is the valley you can see on the top left, had been straightened and severed from their floodplains, and therefore increasing downstream flood risk. And these were historical modifications carried out a couple of centuries previously. Our most valuable habitats, which are the woodlands, the heaths and the species-rich crags, were limited in extent and they were unnaturally compartmentalised. The farming operation was relatively intensive, carrying far more sheep than the landscape could really sustain without having to bring in costly artificial inputs. Okay, next slide, please. So this is the landscape as we hope it will look by 2050, as the changes that we're currently making come to fruition. We've done a considerable amount of work already. We've restored some of our rivers. You can make out in the top left valley again, the river is now re-meandered, so and it's better connected to its floodplain. We've restored large swathes of species-rich hay meadow. We've planted tens of thousands of trees, some as blocks of woodland, but also as hedges and scattered trees within the landscape to create a wood pasture. We've restored well over 1,000 hectares of peatland by blocking up those artificial drains and reprofiling eroded peat hags, and addressing inappropriate grazing in those areas as well. Changes to grazing, shifting away from large numbers of sheep to a mixture of sheep, cattle and ponies, means that we're already seeing good natural regeneration of woodland, scrub and heath in many areas. And this trajectory of recovery should allow these habitats to continue to recover, creating an intimate mosaic of habitats which grade into each other more naturally. As habitats recover, we'd expect to see an increase in the range of species, birds, flowers, insects and mammals. Some of the species that are depicted here, such as red kites and white-tailed eagles, they've been reintroduced to the UK. And we expect their continued expansion to mean that our site will be colonised at some point in the future. And there's some species which are currently scarce on site, things like curlew, windchat, cuckoo and snipe, and we'd expect all of those to increasing number as the habitats continue to develop. The change to our farming operation is not only better for nature, but it's also significantly better for our farm business. Smaller numbers of hardy livestock mean less costly inputs, and it's farming in a system which is much more in keeping with traditional practices which were widespread before agricultural subsidies intensified the management of huge areas of the uplands following the Second World War. These landscape images give us a good overview, but obviously there's a lot more to landscapes like these than can be perceived from this sort of scale. So let's have a look at a little bit more detail. So next slide, please. So many of our blanket bogs, which covered large expanses of our upland areas and indeed large expanses of the uplands across the UK in general, looked like the left-hand image in 2012. So they were heavily drained and they were overgrazed. And by blocking up those drains and bringing the water levels back to the surface, we're already seeing peat-forming vegetation recovering and a flourishing of wetland wildlife. So we're converting a habitat which was emitting carbon as the peat was drying and releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere to one which is actively locking up carbon and forming peat and becoming a carbon sink. Next slide, please. So our mossy ancient woodlands are the real jewel in the crown from a biodiversity point of view and a carbon point of view at Haweswater. So these are temperate rainforests in effect, so epiphytic species growing on trees, very rich in bird life, lots of summer migrant species like pied flycatchers and redstarts. And what a big focus for our work is expanding these, what are effectively relics of this habitat, up onto the fells to buffer them, to allow them to expand, and for all of the benefits that brings. We'll also expect to see species like pine martens recolonize as they recover from historical persecution, which will have a knock-on benefit in protecting our population of red squirrels, which are an important species in the Lake District National Park. Next slide, please. So in the UK, beavers are in the process of recolonizing following reintroductions, and they deliver a huge range of benefits to both nature and to ecosystem services. So they are kind of nature-based solutions all by themselves, really. And it's likely that we will see these, we'll see beavers recolonize at some point in the future, whether through reintroduction or by natural spread. And many areas up in the higher parts of the catchment where water can be slowed by their dams will have a significant benefit at both reducing downstream flood risk and also improving the quality of the water before it flows into the reservoir. They will also provide a potential ecotourism benefit. There is a rapidly expanding ecotourism market in the UK, people wanting to connect with nature, and beavers provide a fantastic spectacle in terms of the work they do and the other wildlife that they support. Okay, last slide, please. So everything that we're doing at Haweswater has a focus both on nature and on people. And of course, the two are heavily intertwined. So the ecosystem service benefits that we are looking to deliver, the reduced risk to water quality, reduced flood risk, increased carbon sequestration, and a more beautiful, wild, richer landscape for people to enjoy. But there are also significant benefits to the local community and economy as well. So since taking over in 2011 and 12, we've doubled the number of permanent and full-time jobs. So there's now a team of 10, including myself, working at Haweswater.
Sorry, can interview, Leah, we can't hear you anymore. I don't know if other people can hear. Oh dear, okay, it seems like we lost him.
Local contractors.
Okay, there you are again, thank you. Sorry, we lost you for a minute, Lee. Oh dear. Okay, well, it looks like we lost connection with him, but I think that maybe he can rejoin us hopefully in a minute. I think everybody was very impressed with the beautiful graphics and illustrations that I think we were actually privy to. One of the first audiences privy to. He said they were just recently developed. I'm not sure how they were developed, which was one of the questions that were coming in. But hopefully Lee can check his connection and join us again in a few moments. And maybe we could come back to him again for questions at that time. So I just, I'm trying to see what's going on in the chat here, but I think everybody really appreciated it, his example that he gave us, his real life example. And that's one of a handful of early mover projects that are underway right now in the UK. So we're very excited to hear more about all of them. But there he is. He's joined us again.
I'm so sorry. Zoom just shut me out. Literally, as I was about to say thank you for listening. So anyway, I was finished. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Lee. That was an excellent presentation, and everybody thoroughly enjoyed the beautiful illustrations. There were some questions about how they were created. And also I have some questions you were started to answer right at the end before we lost you about a number of people it's taken to actually implement the size of a project you're talking about. To me, it's huge. And in just a matter of 8 years or so, you've been able to really make a huge difference. Well, you're talking about the jobs doubled compared to 2012, but how long has this been going on, and how many people do you think will be involved by the time the project's over? I just wonder.
So I don't think this is referring to it as a project is probably a little bit false. I hope this isn't going to be a project that's going to be over. It's a long-term relationship that we have with United Utilities, and it will be very much about adaptive management and continuing to respond to changing societal needs as we go forward. So I'd like to think that the level of employment that we have now will certainly not reduce, and will continue to grow as we develop new initiatives, whether they be ecotourism or new approaches to farming. The image on the screen at the moment shows a new tree nursery that we've just opened up. So we've taken down a redundant sheep shed, which was built to house the large numbers of sheep that were there previously, and we've turned that into a tree nursery, which I think is quite a nice story in itself, really. So we're obviously a large NGO. We're working in partnership with a large utility company, so there is significant resource and significant expertise within those organisations that allow us to deliver, and we recognise that helps us, and is not something that every farmer and every organisation can necessarily deliver to the same sort of scale. But we're being very open about everything that we're doing with regard to the finances and with the detail, and we hope that different elements of it can be cherry picked and applied in other places to suit individual projects and individual landscapes. Okay, no, that's great. So the visualizations were so there's been quite a few of these sorts of things done in the UK now, actually, and there's the artist that we used is a chap that's done sort of half a dozen or so, and we worked very closely with him. And basically, we used our management plan. We identified the actions that we were taking and the responses that we would expect to get from those management interventions. And because he's a very talented naturalist, he understands how nature works, he was able to visualize those for us. So yeah, I think they're going to provide a really useful tool for us to communicate what we're doing to others. They're lovely. You'll see all the comments in the chat about them. Everybody likes them. Just maybe one quick last question. Just one of the participants asked if we could tell us more about the risk aspect for understanding the balance of trade-offs that you're having to deal with. Yeah, I mean, the main trade-off, I suppose, is around the cultural heritage. There's a perception that what we're doing is having a potentially negative impact on food security. But actually, that's not really the case. The very marginal upland landscapes like ours can only sustain so much output. They can only produce so much output. And we carried out a nutrient study just soon after we took over the farm tenancies and realized that the artificial feedstuffs that were being brought in to feed the livestock, to feed the inflated numbers of livestock, actually meant that our food output was effectively negative, because we were feeding feedstuffs that could potentially be fed directly to people, to livestock. So, you know, the food security argument doesn't really hold any water. There is a perception that what we're doing is somehow working against the cultural heritage of the area. However, I would argue that cultural heritage is always adapting to meet the needs of society, and that this is just you know, a step in that continuing evolution. So I think the trade-offs are actually very small. There's very few risks to what we're doing.
Okay, well, thank you very much. You'll see you have a few more questions in the chat. If you have time to look at them and answer, that would be great. But just to help keep us on time, I think we'll move to the next presenter now. Thank you so much, Lee. That was excellent. Thank you, Gerard, for handling the slides. Now I would like to introduce one of IUCN's experts on oceans and climate, Dorothy Herr, who is with IUCN's Global Marine and Polar Program. And Dorothy is going to provide another concrete example of NbS in action. So Dorothy, over to you. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot. Yeah, let's hope the right slides are in, since I still shared a few updates last night. But yeah, next slide, please. Great to be here, and thanks a lot for bringing in a bit the blue, the coastal side of this story. We embarked on an effort around what we call Blue Natural Capital, and really the idea, and maybe if you do one more click, that focuses very particularly on the coastal ecosystem services side. So how do we conserve, restore coastal ecosystem within this NbS context, but then also linked in the broader context of making these project bankable, so really making them sustainable, resilient, not only for climate, people, nature, but also in financial terms. And there we were looking at how to combine some of these nature-based solutions with other sectors, with sort of technology and other economic sectors that can support this effort. Thank you. Next slide. Yeah, I don't know if this graph sort of can compete with the really pretty ones we saw before, but equally we tried to give it a visual identity in terms of what do we mean coastal infrastructure with or without NbS. And of course, it is to some degree a bit of an exaggerated picture, but it's really to highlight what we are losing when we are degrading coastal ecosystem, whether it's the mangroves and the CO2 emission or the coral reefs, both for biodiversity or tourism, and sort of that really on this nevertheless landscape level, we can have quite devastating impacts if we don't take care of nature. Next slide, please. And here then, equally, if we go into the positive side, we try to show in this graph how, if we think a bit bigger outside of the box, working with different sectors, different actors, to combine some of these, for example, climate resilient efforts we need around renewable energy or coastal protection, but how can we ensure that those go hand in hand and actually create nature-based solutions, engage with nature, conserve and restore them, again, may it be around coral reefs or mangroves, or broadly also fisheries, aquaculture. How can we use tools like marine spatial planning, marine protected areas to bring those benefits to the forefront, but ultimately also how to finance them. And again, there are different levels, whether it might be through a multilateral development bank or down to sort of more impact investor, aligned with sort of the grant support, technical support for getting some of these projects off the ground. But this was really a try to sort of illustrate what is within the context of nature-based solution, a sort of ideal scenario that we could all thrive towards, and that ultimately will also be funded and financed, and that can mutually benefit from each other. Next slide, please. Yeah, in this context of nature-based solutions, coastal infrastructure, green-grey, I just wanted to highlight this effort by the green-grey community of practice. It's led by Conservation International, so if people are interested to joining that, happy to make the connection. And they actually have this practical guide for implementing such of those solutions as well. And I actually also like this graph to sort of show the bandwidth between the more nature-based coastal conservation efforts down to sort of the human, the grey spectrum. But again, I think even if you have a mangrove conservation project per se, it doesn't mean it's necessarily a nature-based standard adherence. So there's of course then the level to put on top of that, whether it follows certain the criteria and the indicators. Next slide, please. So here's very briefly a small effort we are running where we're trying to help such projects. In the coastal areas, we're running something called the Blue Natural Capital Financing Facility, which is an on-granting mechanisms where we are selecting project based on certain parameters and indicators as well, where we help them on one hand to improve their conservation angle, the nature-based solution angle, but as well to helping them figure out the bigger question around how to make them quote unquote bankable and really get interest from the broader financial sector. We are in the process of actually revising our own criteria, trying to align them much more to the nature-based standard and indicators, for also helping those projects further down the line to actually report and measure their impacts vis-a-vis the standard. And I know there are other efforts out there, for example, like the Subnational Climate Fund, who is a new fund and technical assistant related to climate smart infrastructure and nature-based solutions, who are equally trying to align within the sort of the sourcing, the selection of the project, but also later the impact measuring, where we're working very closely with the gold standard to get those efforts on track as well. Next slide, please. So here's the set of projects that we're currently supporting with the BNCFF. Actually today, I'm not entirely sure if the press release is out yet, but we'll have a new one in Belize that we did in the blended fashion with the Sustainable Ocean Fund. So that's coming online today. And again, here we're working with those existing projects already to help them, lay over the nature-based solution standard. And again, seeing how well they actually match or where they can improve. I think that's one of the points made by Gerard early on, that there's always the standard is also there to help show a bit the weaknesses of the project, and then with the support to overcome those. Next slide, please. So I wanted to quickly finish with a bit of a zoom in on aquaculture. I'm by no means an aquaculture expert, but I think because we're talking also about the financial viability, etc., it's often very interesting to look at these natural resources projects. And I think it's difficult to say, is aquaculture now an NbS? That's obviously not a statement we can make, because aquaculture is a very broad sector and it has very different activities. And the results vis-a-vis sort of an NbS overlay, of course, heavily depend on where projects are in what development stage. And I think to some degree, we see also some sort of lower scores based on certain indicators and criteria, because certain activities either haven't happened yet. So maybe a stakeholder consultation hasn't happened yet in a very new project. And I think that's to keep in mind as well, if it might not just be a one-time applying of the standard, but it's really a tool, a facilitative tool to help project developers sort of accompany their different stages. So I think that's something to keep in mind as well, that I said, oh my God, if a score comes back, less than expected, it really also depends on the stages, or as Gerard said, it sometimes triggers the information flow, that certain information might have been there, but it's hidden somewhere, or it actually has to be, supported and developed. So I think that is good to keep that in mind. And also I think important to notice that, of course, the nature-based solution standard doesn't work in isolation. There are other standards, methodologies, principles, best practices out there that are already, very much looking towards what we consider the nature-based solutions outcome. So yeah, very briefly, sort of maybe not surprising, but the early results that we see from the overlay of the standard on aquaculture project is that they score rather low on the biodiversity net gain part. But again, that is sort of an incentive to do better on that part, as well as around stakeholder engagement processes and the broader governance question. Again, there could be various reasons for that, but that is just sort of a first feedback that we got. Next slide, please. Where they do a little bit better is on addressing societal challenges. Of course, they are primarily focused around food security and providing income. However, many of the projects also, of course, try to address climate adaptation, mitigation, as sort of addressing them as societal solution. I think economic and the financial viability, they score pretty well. However, I think the one that is a bit more debatable is who do the benefits or the financial benefits go to, and how is really the community engaged in them. So I think, again, the idea behind the standard to look at this entirety, the spectrum of not just are they actually economically viable, but who profits and who has engaged in them. What we found, these were some of the projects we are engaged in directly with the BNCFF, is that they score relatively high on the sustainability and mainstreaming side, because that is also part where we come in and help them do that work, because through sort of the engagement with actors like ourselves, of course, we want to bring in the lessons learned, and we're actually in the process of writing up a variety of blueprints based on these Blue Natural Capital projects. So please stay tuned for those as well. It might be of interest. So to stop, the verdict is still out, and again, I think it's very project dependent. But again, I think, would bring this in as an, again, incentive to using the NbS standard as a tool for improvement and making project impacts more powerful. And just pitching here from my colleagues, there is an publication coming on NbS and aquaculture later in the summer. So for those that are interested in that particular sector, please look out for those news. And with that, I'll stop. Thank you very much.
Dorothy, thank you very much. It was a great presentation. And I also want to just give your website a plug for people who want more information, because it has lots of nice, beautiful information on it, and easy to understand graphics and videos and everything else, multimedia stories, which are really nice. You had a question come in that's from Simon Chuo, who asked, do you have any examples or case studies in Africa's drylands? So taking you out of the oceans.
I'm the ocean person, so I cannot say much about the drylands. No, this is really, I mean, this particular focus is on the coastal side. So I don't know if Gerard or Veronica can help out, but I don't know that one.
Okay, but I can say at IUCN, we do have colleagues that are working on that as well. So maybe we can share those details with Simon afterwards. Also, we had a general question about how COVID has affected some of these projects. Can you talk to that a little bit about the impact?
Yeah, no, they definitely have. I mean, we were lucky, or those projects that had actually on the ground staff, of course, they have been doing rather well, and they could continue in sort of some constraints. Other projects that were, for example, reliant on bringing in external consultants to do certain survey or baselines assessment, of course, that was pushed back quite heavily. So, I mean, all in all, I was still impressed how well they did. there was some sort of delay in timeline. It was based on, permits or travel visas to get into the country to some degree. But overall, we, of course, as sub-grantees, we gave a bit more leeway to allow for some of these flexibilities. But overall, there's they have still continued. They have, made a few adjustments like every one of us did. But overall, the projects are still all ongoing.
Okay, and then maybe just one more question, if you could just give a quick answer so we don't go too much over time. But somebody asked, without grants, how can such NbS projects attract funding and investment? So it's a tough one to answer.
I'm not entirely sure if I understand these projects without NbS. So maybe I can answer it this way. So when we started this facility, we basically got two big broad sets of demand. One was coming more from the conservation angle and who wanted a bit more support in around the question, how do I make my projects bankable and viable and attract private sector? But then we got more sort of the private sector side with startups or some sort of other type of small scale companies that sort of had it more figured out on the business sides, but needed our help on NbS. So I think that was really where we also welcome to working with new stakeholders and actors of saying, look, we have here a project, can you help us figure out if there is an NbS component and how do we do that? And I think, again, it's very generalized, but certainly just because a project doesn't have NbS doesn't mean it can't in the future. And I think what we learned speaking with some of those project developers, discussing the opportunity, the sort of the bigger picture, it's not just the financial viability, but it's the broader impact you can generate with actually implementing proper NbS. It sort of changed, like you could see, oh, click. And then, but of course it comes also with, potentially making your participation bigger, cooperation, partnerships that you need different actors to come in playing different roles. But it's very exciting to see how it sort of trickles down and say, oh yeah, we can explore this. So that's quite exciting.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Sophia. There'll be other questions probably in the chat that maybe you could take a look at. But just to keep us on time, I'm going to ask if Gerard, if I can pass the baton back to you to give us a quick wrap up on the next steps for scaling up NbS.
Yep, great to do that. You can hear me properly? Okay, so on the next step on scaling up, and this is about, the whole governance structure, the transparency, learning, and how we want to improve future solutions. So for that, we are in the process of setting up an international standards committee that will have various representatives, of civil society, science, academia, but also practitioners and hopefully also private sector in this, so that, it's really a broad-based committee that we have. Clearly, there is a science and knowledge committee that will continue to refine and do the research priorities on the various evidence-based and the need to revise the standard as we are now using it. And then the user group is also another key element. And this is also where this outreach is part of, is for you to encourage to sign up to the user group. I guess we're going to set up some emails. This has been happening since the launch of the standard, because the idea is we want to have a feedback loop with you to make sure that the standard is responding to your needs and is really user friendly, because there's no point of having a standard that stays somewhere in a brochure in a cupboard. We want it to be used, and especially we want to make sure that the projects are scaled up. The last piece, which will be extremely important, are the national and the regional hubs. So where we want to basically, with some support of countries, create specific expertise and capacity building opportunities, but focalized and really centered around a specific region or a specific area in a country. So, there was this questions about drylands. Do you have some in Africa? So we're looking at the Great Green Wall, and that might actually be one of these nice hubs. China is one, and we actually had the standard that was released, I think it was yesterday, in Chinese out there. So there we also hopefully, at some time being able to have the regional hubs. And we're working with country support to actually set these regional hubs that allows then for experts to come together. So the standards users group is growing. We've got 59 countries already covered, a different range of sectors. And it has technical experts, government representatives, scientists and consultants. And we are really trying, and that's what I will be focusing on in the next slide, wanting to really create a user group that's really geared towards the private sector. So the idea is that we want among the private sector, and this includes the finance world as well, to really create a community out there that is really sharing evidence-based and feedback, to make sure that we improve the tools and the support. So the original, the starting tool, the one that we've been showing you and shared with is, of course, the self-assessment tool, which you've seen. We are trying to make sure that that's going to be available on the web platform and be interactive so that you can enter in your scores or enter in your evidence, and then the scores can actually come out, and then also ask for support and advice. Now, we are looking to develop with the finance world more nature-based solutions, investment decision tools, or benefit calculator tools. I saw in the chat a lot of questions about carbon credits and how are they integrated. And we know that a lot of nature climate solutions or submissions of nature-based solutions have the carbon credits, all elements included in that. But there are so many other co-benefits that could be measured and entered in that. So that would be one of the tools that we'll want to develop further, and anybody interested in contributing to that is most welcome. So really, in the end, we want basically to be able to provide a platform where knowledge and exchange can happen with experts and with people that are actually implementing nature-based solutions, helping with identifying what kind of means of verification do you have for the various criteria, and then providing online support. We will have differentiated type of support that is ongoing and proposed at the moment to NbS partners, where there's really the willingness to implement a whole portfolio of activities, and where they want more than just tailor-made support. And we will have then more, let's say, initial NbS self-assessments where there will be a minimal fee being given for that, and then just a general guidance. The other elements that I haven't highlighted in here is the willingness for IUCN to also create some specific NbS training materials and sessions, which will not be for free this time, where we really want to train people to be NbS experts and be able to have people that really understand the standard inside out and are then really able to implement and coach other projects to be developed, so that you can even valorize your skills and your knowledge out within your company or other organizations that you might work for. Okay, so there's a global standard toolkit that we are trying to develop over time. I mean, the idea is we want to monitor the impact and the results so that you can monitor them as well. And we want to facilitate the further doing and the scaling up of projects. So that's what this user community is going to do, and what the set of tools are going to do ultimately. Now, embedding NbS is a puzzle with a lot of different pieces. I heard or I saw in the chat quite a few questions around standards and how are we linking up with gold standard or other verification schemes. That's very much a discussion that we are having at the moment. And one of the ideas is really to make sure we are doing something additional to the existing schemes. We don't want to replace what's already out there or even create a whole new scheme. I even saw a question about, are you reinventing SDGs? No, we want to complement SDGs. We want to feed into SDGs. But we want to work on assurance and oversight, because I know that that's what's being asked by the corporates at the moment, so that we can actually validate performance and ensure that authorities also are integrating this more formally into their elements. So for that, we are working on logos and claims that will be linked to NbS, and that's where there's a whole visual identity that you can already see on some of these slides, and we are trademarking some of the elements as well. And we work really on the impact measurement, because in the end, the success of NbS and the whole community of NbS is if we are able to demonstrate that we have a positive impact on people and nature, because that's what we are trying to obtain at the end. It's not a number of projects. We want to make sure that each individual project and the conglomerate of all the projects are delivering the benefits that we want. Oops, sorry about that. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Gerard. Do you think you could share the screen now with Katia? We're going to go, there's one more slide that has the Mentimeter information.
Great, thanks. I think we'll stick to just one Mentimeter.
Okay.
Or let's see if we manage to do both or not. Let's see. Great. So guys, I'd like to just have you again connect on Mentimeter. So just a reminder again to simply go on www.menti.com. Again, you can see at the top here of the screen the link, the code 41478004. And I mean, you've just heard a lot of really useful information, a lot of great practical case studies. So coming out of this second workshop, what is your key takeaway or learning point that you're going to be going away with? So take a few moments to reflect here. Again, there's been a lot of information that's been shared. That what's going to be that one thing that you will go away with. And perhaps Gerard or Lee, Veronica, or any other speakers, you can also feel free to jump in and reflect on some of the answers here. So a few of you guys are mentioning the assessment tool that Gerard just walked through. Great.
Yeah, so I'm watching all these things. I mean, you know, this is the start of a journey as well for us. You know, with the assessment tool, we want to make it more accessible, web-based, and it's really your input that will make it better. I also agree with some of the comments on visualization, how much that's useful, and thank you, Lee, really for bringing that to us. But also Dorothy, you know, some of your great slides, because having these visualizations help a lot, and this is also where, you know, hopefully we are able to demonstrate impact as well. The multi-stakeholder engagement piece, I'm glad that you're picking this up, because this is really, you know, one of the key features we think of NbS. You know, it's not solutions that have to be or can be developed on your own. This really needs, you know, a collaborative effort between many.
Great. I see there's a few that are also saying that they will try to get started on using the standard. So that's great news.
Exactly. So we will, you know, capture all these things with Menti. This doesn't get lost. We'll keep all these comments. We also will look at the chat if there are still some questions left that we need to answer there. But we're getting to the end of the session, so I think we need to go to the wrap up, Leanne, and I think it's our UNEP colleagues.
Yes, please.
Correct?
There's two more slides. If you can share your screen again, Gerard, please. And I would just like to introduce our colleague from UNEP, Mikel Fernandez, who is going to take us through those slides and close the session. So over to you, Mikel.
Thank you, Leanne. Yes, so if you've enjoyed this workshop, then we would love to invite you to join us for the next workshop, which will take place on the 1st of July. So the workshop will be led by my colleagues at the United Nations Environment Programme, also known as UNEP. And you can find all the details and registration information for this workshop on the We Value Nature platform, which you can find on the chat. So please make sure you register as soon as possible and do spread the word for us. The second thing I want to note is about certificates. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Great. So for those of you who are interested in getting a certificate of participation for this workshop, all you need to do is complete the quiz at the end of the workshop. The quiz will be available on the We Value Nature platform. And for the quiz, all you need to do is score at least 70% to pass. And for those of you who are doing the quiz for the first time, the quiz is multiple choice, and you have multiple attempts to take the quiz. So eventually you should pass. In fact, you can even watch all of our workshop recordings on the Value Nature platform. So yes, best of luck with the quiz. And if you manage to complete all 3 quizzes and all 3 workshops, you're a star. You'll get yet another certificate of completion. So don't miss out on this opportunity and complete the quiz and get your certificate. And could we go to the next slide, please? Great. So lastly, I want to thank everyone for attending this workshop. And if you'd like to further your knowledge on nature-based solutions, we do offer an online course. It's a very fundamental, basic course that is open to anyone. So the course was developed by UNEP and Better, along with our partners with support provided by the European Commission. Our online course has over 43,000 participants from 192 countries. So the course is free to everyone, and it's available in 7 languages. So you can take the course regardless of your background, and it's just an opportunity for you to join our learning community and to join our call to action. So lastly, on behalf of UNEP, I do want to thank everyone for joining us today, and a special thanks to our partners, our donor, and to our amazing speakers and moderator. So hope to see all of you registering for our course and also for our next workshop. Wishing you all the best, and thank you for your time. Back to you, Leanne.
Thank you all. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you to all of our wonderful speakers. So this, just for those who maybe didn't join at the beginning, it will be repeated at the end again this afternoon, and look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.